when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam reached Medina, and Quba is from the outskirts of Medina, it's considered as part of Medina. What did the Sahaba do? What do we know? Like, for example, if I was to ask you, usually when we hear about the Prophet ﷺ's arrival into Medina, and we hear a very famous song which has become probably the base for thousands of nasheeds, and what is it? Anybody know it? MashaAllah. Tala, badru, Alayna. Tala يعني rose. Al-badru يعني the full moon. Alayna. And this is something that we find in many places. And the next verse we find min thaniyatin wada'. Wada' is a valley. Thaniyat يعني from this area of wada'. This is a famous nasheed, and it has really beautiful wording. It has a lot of depth to it. But did it historically happen or not? This is the issue. So when we look at this issue, we read in Zad al-Ma'ad ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he says the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they made takbirat. They said Allahu Akbar. When they saw that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was coming, they said Allahu Akbar. And we saw this to be from the Sunnah even in the earlier times. When something happy happens or something good happens, you praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even when we talked about Dar al-Arqam and when Umar bin Khattab radiallahu became Muslim, the Sahaba, they said Allahu Akbar. So loud that the people outside could hear, so they dispersed. Because at the time, all those meetings were in secret. So when we look at this narration, it is reported by Al-Bayhaqi and Dalal al-Nabuwa about Tala al-Badru Alayna, about this nasheed that we sing today, and it is used. And before I continue, I don't mean to discourage anybody from reading it. I mean, it has nice wording, it's a beautiful nasheed. If you want to listen to it or read it, it's up to you. But if you attribute something to the Sahaba or to history, you have to make sure it is authentically proven. So Al-Bayhaqi, when he reported it from Aisha radiallahu anha, and the reporter from him, he's called Ibn Aisha, even though he's not the son of Aisha radiallahu anha. As we know, she didn't have any sons. In the checking of Al-Bayhaqi, he himself shows that there are 3 missing narrators. 3 consecutive narrators that are missing. Imam al-Iraqi, he is Abu al-Fadl al-Iraqi, he was the teacher of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. In his takhrij of Ihya Ulumuddin, Ihya Ulumuddin by Al-Ghazali, he said this is a mu'dal hadith. Mu'dal, as those of the brothers who were there in the Mustalah hadith class, you know it is a hadith where you have 2 or more consecutive missing narrators. Al-Bayhaqi himself says that this could not have happened at this time. Rather, Al-Bayhaqi, he says this happened when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was returning from Tabuk. That this singing of this nasheed did not happen when he was entering Mecca. This happened when he was coming back from Tabuk, and we'll discuss that when we get to Tabuk. But I'm just explaining to you this. Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he mentioned some amazing points. Zad al-Ma'ad. If you don't have it, you should get this book. Amazing book. When he discusses this issue, he says if we look at the wording of the nasheed itself, Tala al-Badru Alayna, that came upon us or rose upon us, the full moon, min thaniyat al-wada'. Wada' is a valley on the opposite side of Medina from Quba. You go home, Google it, look at where Quba is, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is entering, and where Wada', the valley of Wada' is, it's on the opposite side. It's towards Sham. So Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah says that it is, even the wording shows that this could not have been done at that time, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not coming from the valley of Wada', he was coming from the side of Quba. So now in Tabuk, they were coming back from Sham, which is towards Wada', so it is a possibility then. And we'll discuss that when we get to Tabuk. But when we discuss the time here in Medina, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is making the hijrah from Mecca to Medina. So Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he says that there are 3 narrators missing consecutively. So if you have one weak narrator, that's one issue. It's also a weak hadith. If you have two weak narrators, that's bad. If you have a missing narrator, that's a very big issue. Saqt al-Rawi. Because now you don't know who that narrator is. It could have been a kadhab, it could have been a liar, it could have been a good person, we just don't know. Now if you have two consecutive missing narrators, it's a very big issue. If you have three missing narrators in a row, this could be three liars, we have no idea. This is a very weak hadith. Mu'dal ahadith are very weak. Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he explains the weakness of the hadith, and then he says, فَهُوَ وَحْمٌ ظَاهِرٌ. That this is clearly wahm. This is clearly a misunderstanding, something that somebody imagined, because the wording doesn't support it, and the sanad doesn't support it. Before I brought this to you, because I knew this may be a shock to a lot of people who have always heard this in so many movies and videos and cartoons and nasheed, so I went to research the issue. Ibn Hajar Asqalani, Imam Ibn Hajar Asqalani, Al-Hafiz Ibn Hajar, the famous scholar, in his famous book Fath al-Bari, and I'm sure all of you have seen it if you don't already own it, the most famous sharh of Sahih al-Bukhari, what does he say? He says the hadith is munkati', it is broken. It cannot be attributed to even the Sahaba or Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu al-Fadl al-Iraqi, his teacher, in his tafrij of Ihya Ulumuddin, he says mu'dal. If we look at Al-Mar'i bin Yusuf, the famous scholar, the author of Dalil al-Talib, he also, in his book, which is the Fawaid al-Mawdu'a, the Ahadith al-Mawdu'a, he says that it is mu'dal with three consecutive missing narrators. It cannot be attributed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. Sheikh al-Islam Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah, in his Majmu' al-Fatawa, also said this hadith is extremely weak. It is mu'dal with three missing narrators, and it cannot be depended upon. Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah in Zad al-Ma'ad, he did the same. Sheikh Albani, in his Silsila Hadith al-Da'ifa, has also narrated this hadith to be mu'dal and da'if. In fact, I could not find a single scholar from the ulama of hadith that strengthened it. Even though I found it in books being reported, but without the sanad. Because every time the sanad is checked, we have at least three missing narrators. Some of the ulama even took it as mu'allaq because there was such a big gap. Either way, it is definitely not correct. The sanad is extremely weak with three missing narrators, and the matan, the wording, does not support the geographical location, because Wada' is towards Sham on the opposite end of Medina, and Quba is on the opposite end, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what we know from the Sahih Hadith, he entered Quba. So, what we find from the ulama of Islam is that this wording for Tala badru Alayna, this is not preserved, it's extremely weak. It's not just like, okay, it's a da'if hadith, so it's okay. So mu'dal hadith that cannot be relied on. What do we know? What did the Sahaba radiallahu anhum do for sure? They said takbir, they said Allahu Akbar. And this is something that has been recorded in authentic ahadith across the books of Tariq. Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah and Zad al-Ma'ad and others have reported.
إنما أمرت أن أعبد رب هذه البلدة الذي حرمها وله كل شيء وأمرت أن أكون من المسلمين وأن أتلو القرآن فمن اهتدى فإنما يهتدي لنفسه ومن ضل فقل إنما أنا من المنذرين وقل الحمد لله سيريكم آياته فتعرفونها وما ربك بغافل عما تعملون.